It is working pretty well.
Okay, we are now on YouTube. So if you're watching this on YouTube, bear with us. We will be officially starting in a few minutes. We're starting the live stream ahead of time in order to make sure that it all works and you don't miss a thing. So the live stream people, you're in the backstage. This is what it looks like. How should we keep them amused? Has anyone got a joke?
Philip, you are very good at jokes. Yeah, it puts me on the spotlight.
I don't think I've got one which is appropriate.
Maybe also taking advantage of the time, it would be good to introduce the other REN21 colleagues. So we have Hand, who is also one of the leaders of this GSR, and she was leading on the events on buildings and tomorrow in agriculture. And he's just next to Jad in the room, though it doesn't look like it. Then we have Xiao, who you briefly saw. She's leading on social media, so she'll be doing the streaming backstage and the tweeting live. And then we have Hala, who is also part of the communications team, and will be spotting key quotes, messages from the panel to promote the event in our communications channels and then for the future. And then we have Yuko, who is working with the GSR team as well, supporting the research and data. And it's also one of the key elements for this year's GSR. And I think I'm not missing anyone. And well, it's very nice to see your faces after I was sending you emails day after day. So I appreciate you took the invitation. Maybe we'll see each other more often because I'm working now on community development / communications. So it's a pleasure to have you here.
While you're doing this, I think it's also the moment for us to really kudos for that demand module. I really enjoyed reading it. I read more than transport. I thought, like, come on, this is an occasion for cultivating a bit myself. It's free education. It's impressive. So and we know what it takes to get to a publication like that. So hey, team, well done. I know on top you had the Spirec conference, just like there just yesterday. So really, bravo.
Thank you very much. I think also when it's a shorter report, people are more encouraged to read. So I think that's a positive also evolution.
Indeed.
Yeah.
But that doesn't make it easier for the backstage teams because we are doing the same with our GSR, and this sort of modular production has also, it's presents its challenges.
Yeah. You work nonstop instead of having a peak.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But rest assured that it's paying. The work you're doing is excellent.
Thank you.
Well, I don't know, Philip, if you're in Brussels, but I'm in shock with the sunshine. I'm almost in denial. I don't know what to do with the light here. I'm not so used to all this sunshine in Brussels.
This is wasted energy. We're not harnessing all of it.
Frankly, yeah. And the amount of thermal energy I'm producing right now because I'm just under the sun and there's nothing I can do about it. Absolutely.
It'll snow tomorrow, don't you worry.
Yeah, I'm sure it will. But hey, come on, it's still too late. Don't spoil my my sunshine state of mind.
Now, 2 minutes to the hour. If it's okay with you, I'm going to start playing this music and start letting people in.
Good.
Is that good with everybody?
Yes, good to go.
Okay, here we go.
Hello, hello, and welcome everyone. So welcome everyone for our third event of this week. We launched last week on Thursday the demand modules. The demand modules of the GSR 2023, and during this week we're hosting 4 events for each energy consuming sector. On Monday we hosted the event where we introduced the building module. Yesterday we had a very exciting event on industry, and today welcome to the transport module. My name is Jad Baba. I'm part of the knowledge and data team here at REN21. Just 1 second. I'm hearing myself echo.
Yeah. Somebody, let's mute everybody. And,
all right. I think this is better. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sorted.
Just like a few housekeeping rules. Please mute yourselves when you're not speaking. We're going to start this event with a presentation that looks at the findings of the transport module in the GSR 2023, and then we're going to have a panel discussion with 4 great speakers, and then we'll open the floor for Q&A. And I hope you enjoyed today's event. So I'm gonna start with sharing my screen. And
hi. You got something to share?
all right. Just let me know if you can see my screen. All is well. All right. So the title of our event is "How is renewable energy reshaping transport?" Or is it actually reshaping transport? We will see in the next 1 hour and a half. So REN21 is a global broker of renewable energy data. We are a community of stakeholders, a multi-stakeholder community of industries, NGOs, science and academia, working to advance the shift to renewables. Our community is based on 4,000 change makers and experts representing the renewable energy sector overall. Our annual publications are one of the most comprehensive crowdsourced reports on renewable. We build crowdsourced knowledge and data to inform, influence, and shape strategic communications and debates on renewables. We really rely on our community of experts to provide us with the data, but also to validate informal and formal data. Our GSR has been the flagship report of REN21 since 2005. It's a collaborative effort from the REN21 team, our team of authors, contributors, and data reviewers, and we tap into networks of experts all over the world pushing the transition and the renewable energy agenda. The GSR has seen a lot of changes and evolutions since 2005, as you can see in design, but also in structure. And this year, for the 2023 report or edition, we are calling it the GSR collection, and we are publishing it in a modular way, where we are starting with the renewable energy in demand, our first module, which looks at the four main energy consuming sectors, building, industry, transport, and agriculture. And later, in a few months, we will have published all 4 other modules: renewable energy and supply, that looks at the all renewable energy technologies from the supply side. And then we have a publication dedicated to energy systems and infrastructure for renewables, or how can we achieve a renewable energy based system. Our 4th publication will focus on economic and social value creation with renewables. So really looking at the value that renewables can bring and how it can shape economies and societies worldwide. And finally, a global overview where we will have the global narrative
Alguna cosa
of
que
renewables in
tienes ahí.
2023.
Como cosas como las de las hemorroides, pero para poner ahí.
Can you please mute yourself? Thank you. We believe that this modular approach is a great way to and a great opportunity to bridge silos and bring different people from different ecosystems together. And this is what we're trying to do in today's event, to look at the transport sector from both the renewable energy side and from the transport communities side. So 2022, sorry, was a year that has been characterized by a poly crisis. And starting from October 2021, after the economic rebound following the COVID-19 pandemic, this led to tighter energy markets, and it drove the price of energy up. This was further exacerbated by in February 2022 by the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and also putting more pressure on energy supply and eventually on energy prices, which reached their highest levels since 2008, impacting all energy consuming sectors and leading to global phenomena of inflation in 2022, since energy feeds to everything we consume, from the foods we eat, from the clothes we wear, from the cell phones that we use. Energy feeds.
Jad, sorry, I muted you briefly so that I could make sure to mute all participants. So go ahead, please.
All right. Can you hear me? Yes. All right. And we tried to look at if this poly crisis actually had any impacts and any uptake on renewable energy. And in fact, we looked at some media trends in 2022, and we saw an uptake of renewables in the media mentioned in all energy consuming sectors. So the most increase was in buildings, the most mentions was in industry, but also in transport, a 56% increase for the mention of renewables and transport together by 56%. So there's clearly an interest and a realization that renewables actually can be a solution for the poly crisis, for energy price increase, for stability, for predictability and affordability of energy. Looking at in the shares of renewables in all energy consuming sectors, we see that the energy transition is happening, but it's not happening fast enough. We're on the right direction, but not at the right pace. So renewable energy does not exceed 20% in any of energy consuming sectors. It's the lowest in transport. It's only 4.1% in 2020, and it's uneven among the sectors. However, we can see like 4.7% growth rates per year from 2010 to 2020, but this is not fast enough for the transition that we hope for. Transport in particular has a significant importance because it's the fastest growing sector among energy consumers. It's growing at a 2% rate per year. It contributes to 7% of global GDP and employs 5.6% of global workforce, but it's consuming almost 1/3 of energy consumption, and it's the fastest growing. In 2022, total investment in electric transport was actually equivalent to 80% of total investment in renewables. So if we continue seeing this trend, increasing all of the new electrification of transport won't be covered by renewables, but it will be mostly covered by fossil fuel. In 2022, also we saw a decline of the number of countries that had suspended or reduced their biofuel blending mandates, and it's mostly due to inflation and increase of energy prices. But we also saw a huge increase in investment in electric vehicles and charging infrastructure. It was up by 54% in 2022. Transport also had the highest decrease during the COVID pandemic of all energy consuming sector. It reduced by 13.4%, but it rebounded in 2021 by 7.8%, but was still 6.6% below pre-pandemic level. The use of renewable electricity grew by 7.1% in 2021, but also continuing a rise from 2019 by exceeding 11.9% 2019. So it's a positive aspect of or a positive trend for renewable electricity, but renewable energy and transport is still very low compared to all other energy consuming sectors. From a regional perspective, North America still dominates renewable energy consumption in transport with 42% of all renewable energy use. 90% of all renewable energy consumption in transport is still biofuels. For example, global investment in biofuels reached an all-time high in 2021, but it fell slightly in 2022. Most renewable, Asia and the Pacific region is the fastest growing renewable energy region with the 13% year-to-year growth. It's followed by Latin America with 5.8%. And actually, in Latin America and North America, investments are still happening due to policy support and due to availability of resources. In 2022, so for example, Phillips 66 announced an $850 million investment to convert its crude oil refinery in California to process renewable diesel, biofuels, and sustainable aviation fuels. In Brazil, also a very big investment announcement was made for a biorefinery for $410 million in 2022 to harvest palm oil for biofuels. So electrification in transport is happening, but not at the same rate as other renewable energy and other energy consuming sectors. It was only at 1% in 2010, increased to 1.4% in 2020, and renewable electricity only represented 0.22% in 2010 and up to 0.42% in 2020. But in 21 and 22, we saw a huge increase in electric mobility. The largest investment was made in China, totaling $234 billion investment in 2022, up 87% compared to 21. It was followed by the United States with $57 billion invested in electric mobility and charging infrastructure, and up 53% in 2022. The highest growth was actually in India, which doubled its electric mobility investment in 2022, totaling $3.5 billion in 22. And these investment surges occurred despite sharp increases in the prices of electric vehicle batteries and shortages of raw material and component cost soaring due to inflation. So a very positive development in electric mobility, but this doesn't always mean an increase of, as you may know, an increase of renewable energy shares. We looked at media trends for different renewable energy mentions with different components of the transport sector. We looked at maritime transport with renewables, hydrogen with renewables, electric vehicles with renewables, bioenergy, aviation with renewables, and public transport, buses and rails with renewables. And we see the highest mentioned dominated by electrified transport, and it's mostly being associated with renewables. And the highest year-to-year growth was actually public transport and renewables. Although there's a decrease in mentions, for example, in maritime transport with renewables, we saw visible momentum and announcements in 2022 about green shipping corridors, for example. So ports around the world are signing agreements between each other to not to allow any ships that circulate between these two ports that don't run on a renewable energy fuel. So either mostly it's being biofuels, but also renewable hydrogens. We had a nice snapshot about the port of LA, between the ports of LA and Shanghai, but these also include LA and Singapore, green shipping corridor there, a digital shipping corridor between Korea and the US, and a green shipping corridor signature between Rotterdam and Singapore. The shipping sector is expected to double its emission until 2050. So these policy or agreements are a positive development for the maritime sector. In public transport, we see that the number of, for example, electric 2- and 3-wheelers exceeded 250 million worldwide. Electric buses are projected to triple by 2025, and we highlighted an initiative in Madrid, Spain, that converts actually biogas from municipal waste to fuel the bus fleet of Madrid. We see that the avoid shift improved framework of transport as being essentially or very complementary to what we're trying to do in this transition. For us, as the demand for energy grows and for transport, demand for energy and transport grows, public policy and land management strategies need to be integrated to, for example, reduce the need for motorized transport. Incentives and investment can shift users towards less energy-intensive modes, such as cycling, walking, and rail. And finally, improving the efficiency of the vehicles also can increase the share of renewables in transport. For sustainable aviation, we still see some mixed policy signals, especially that, for example, most EU and US states continue to provide tax incentives for kerosene fuel that is used for aviation, but some positive policy initiatives were made in 2022. The RE Fuel EU aviation package includes a blending mandate for aviation, and in the United States, a 2-year tax credit for sustainable aviation fuel was signed and grants a grant for the development of sustainable aviation fuel for manufacturers. So mixed signals in policy and more policy development required. Biofuel blending mandates still dominate the policy policy scene. It's the most common policy. In total, 56 countries have them in 2022, although 10 countries, as I mentioned before, reduced or suspended them in 22, but also 4 countries increased their mandates. Argentina, India, Indonesia, and Korea. In electric mobility, momentum for electrification of vehicles is growing, and support policies ranging from tax incentives, stimulus packages to specific electric vehicles, and also combined with internal combustion bans are growing all around. For example, in Thailand in 2022, it rolled out a set of exemption and reduction of import duties and excise taxes, as well as subsidies for imported vehicles. Policies for charging infrastructure also gained attention during the year. In France, for example, a new legislation made it mandatory to install solar PV in parking lots that are more than 80 places, and only 5 countries have both 100% internal combustion engine bans and 100% renewable energy targets. So not always ICE bans or electric vehicles lead to 100% renewables, as you all may know. Finally, I would like to end on this slide. We really believe that renewable energy production is not keeping with the pace of energy demand and transport, and investment in renewable-based transport projects need to increase. There's a lot of policy and investment and attention needs to be given to renewables in transport and to advance the transition. Thank you very much for listening. We will start before starting the panel discussion and welcoming all the panelists to the floor. Maybe we can start with the poll, and I'll introduce the panel afterwards. Thank you. So the first poll asks, in your opinion, what are the main reasons for transport having the lowest share of renewables among the sectors? And we thought about four different answers. The first was fossil fuel subsidies, Second was lack of technological solutions, a lack of investment by vehicle manufacturers, or a lack of policy support for renewables. So is it really countries or governments giving mixed signals and subsidizing fossil fuels and not, or is it the other from the other side? Are governments not supporting renewables enough, or is it from the private sector? Is there a lack of investment from the vehicle manufacturers, or the technological solutions are simply not there for the transition to happen? So I think 66% of us answered, and most answers are split between two. So it's between the governments giving mixed signals and subsidizing fossil fuels and not giving enough policy support for renewables. Thank you for answering. I would like to invite all my panelists to start the discussion, maybe about the results of this poll. So we have Marusha Kardama from Slowcat in the panel, Shamashish Das from WRI India, Silvia Rojas Soto from the Latin American Association of Sustainable Mobility, and Philip Turner from UITP. So welcome everyone, and thank you very much for joining us. Hello.
Yes, Chad.
Oh, I'm still seeing my my slides. Sorry. So maybe I'll start with Marusha. What did you think about the answers of the polls? Do you agree that this is mostly the reason why we don't see transport having as much renewable energy shares as other sectors? Is it mostly fossil fuel subsidies, or can we say also the support, the policy support for renewables is not there?
I think it's a combination of all the factors you had, of all the answers you had there, and they were already really good answers, you know. Of course, all those answers are combined in different proportions, but if we were to kind of have the pyramid of what is really blocking, I think, the real transformation here, it's fossil fuel subsidies. It's everything you expressed so nicely with the facts and the figures you've shared with us, Jad, including, of course, tax taxations on kerosene. It's impossible to transform road transport and increase the uptake in renewables, you know, with the prevailing subsidies that we see. It's really impossible to see sustainable aviation fuels penetrating the market much more, while the EU or the US are actually, reducing tax cost on kerosene. It's really very difficult as well to keep the conversations about hydrogen or ammonia or biofuels in general in other sectors that we know are a bit more tricky, like shipping and so on. So I think that is a very important prevailing factor. And I think that something else that you've mentioned that links to the answer that colleagues have given us about policy, is that point you made about, okay, we see great momentum around EVs and around the banning of internal combustion engine vehicles, but that is not being coupled with specific targets that actually introduce as well a renewable energy mix into the grid. So we are missing an opportunity, I believe, and we are seeing impressive mobilization by jurisdictions at the national and the subnational level. So it would be really great if we could see that next level of incorporating targets for electrification. I also think that perhaps we could have a little thought here about hydrogen. We see a lot of around hydrogen, but it's a bit colorblind, that hype that we are seeing, you know. So I think that's also permeating a bit the conversation here. And then two last quick points. I mean, we are not enabling the investors and the users to make the right choices, to make choices towards, say, sustainable low carbon modes and less, say, energy demanding modes. Think about public transport, whether bus or rail, think about walking and cycling. We are not really putting the monies there, and they remain essential modes for giving people access to jobs and to socio-economic opportunities, but also decarbonizing people's daily lives in a rather effective manner. And then when it comes to the alignment of the investment that is made in transport and the measures for increased uptake of renewables in transport, the alignment of all that with the principles of the Paris Agreement on climate change or the Sustainable Development Goals, we are not there yet. We still need to see financial institutions completely shifting the sustainability criteria they use. We need to really see grant policies based on much wider sustainability criteria than what we are seeing right now. We really need to put public money to leverage and de-risk private investment in that uptake of renewables in transport. So I think that, just to keep it short and listen to other colleagues, but I think that it's a combination of factors. But yeah, in a nutshell, I would probably very much agree with those very big baskets of fossil fuel subsidies and how they, spoil the whole equation of what we are trying to change, and then the policy coherence and the systemic policy transformation that we have at hand here.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you very much. May I have a follow-up question about maybe this systemic policy view that is needed? Do you think it should be led by transport energy or transport ministries or energy ministries, or how do we make the integration, and how we can stop the silo thinking?
Well, I mean, you're hitting the nail on the head here, Jad. I think we are still approaching public policy in rather last century approaches, isn't it? In which we try to look into triggering transformation by only looking at each policy at a go. You had a great example there in your facts and your figures about the essential need of integrating land management, energy, and transport policies, even in something as simple as trying to get more charging infrastructure and trying to get more renewable-based charging infrastructure for electric vehicles. We could be thinking about how do we deal with building codes in cities, so you can have already that kind of integration. But then when it comes to that notion of systemic integrated policy, if we don't start mixing climate, health, energy, but I would also say trade and development cooperation policies of countries, we are really not having the kind of coherence we need. In trade, there is a lot of issues, or in development cooperation, there is a lot of issues that pertain to the extraction of the minerals that are needed for batteries of electric vehicles, the recycling of that. In health, obviously, when we talk about fossil fuel subsidies, again, there's going to be a strong component of health there. So how are we going to do it? Well, we need governments who really champion horizontal coordination across their departments, and we see them, they exist. I think that we see it particularly at the subnational level, where things are perhaps easier to land as well. But it's a challenge I think we got ahead. Systemic transformation is going to require that, a systemic approach to policy making.
Thank you. The
opportunity of answering that.
Thank you very much. Maybe Shamasis, would you like to add anything about this systemic approach? Is it happening in India, or is it lacking, and still people are working in silos, working on electric mobility alone and renewable energy alone, or do you see other or improvements maybe that we can learn from India?
Yeah, thank you, Jad. Before answering to this particular question, let me share my take on the poll actually. So I chose the lack of technology solutions and the investment from manufacturers. Let me tell you why. Because if you see the maturity of the ICE technology, internal combustion engine technology, it took more than a half a century actually to kind of reach that mass level, right? And we have about a decade for this electric vehicle technology or the electric traction technology to kind of compete with ICE technology. So although I think human civilization is currently at a stage to accelerate technology improvement and adoption, but I think technologically we are not really at that stage to appeal all sections of the population to kind of shift from the conventional vehicle technology to this new set of technologies. We already understand that these electric vehicles or battery electric vehicles, they have these driving range limitations, range anxiety, it requires a separate set of support infrastructure. So instead of fuel refilling stations, you require charging infrastructure that is kind of very much connected to the power system, and there are all these issues around around these interlinkages, so impacts on grid stability and all those kind of things. And definitely the economics. Actually, at the end of the day, I think everything boils down to economics. So we are talking about the total cost of ownership, right? So that's an economic metric. And we see, for example, in India, you mentioned that India witnessed the highest growth in past year. So we saw more than 200% YOY growth. Why? So the main reason is actually the TCO. So in the electric 2 and 3 wheeler segments, the industry and the potential adopters, they find that electric vehicles are more economical than ICE, because they also see that the fuel prices, petrol, diesel, they are they are increasing, decreasing, and there are vagaries around using these fossil fuels, and they want predictability. And definitely there is this climate change angle, but they want predictability in their businesses, and they see better predictability in EV adoption or in EV use. So that is, I think, one of the key drivers actually, as far as the Indian market is concerned. And definitely there is this policy push from the government. As you know, that India has signed up for this EV 30 at 30. That means by 2030, India wants to achieve 30% EV penetration in its vehicle sales. So that is one. Second is the point, the lack of investment from manufacturers. Why I feel that's also a factor, because these OEMs, they have traditionally invested in one set of technology. So they have their supply chain, they have their factories, the lines oriented around ICE vehicles. And now you have a new technology, quite a different technology actually, and they need to really redesign their their supply chain, their factories actually. So there is this lock-in effect, and the OEMs would like to extract as much as possible from the investment which they have made over the past few decades or past half a century actually. So definitely overnight they will not shift to EV, but definitely they will do that, because they also understand that electric mobility is the future, and they cannot just they cannot just become a fence sitter actually. So there are some progressive OEMs who have already made that move to electric mobility, but I think we are not at that stage that OEMs are saying that, oh, we are not going to sell IC vehicles from tomorrow. If you want to have your own vehicle, you have to buy electric vehicle. That stage we haven't reached yet, right? Okay, now coming to your question, whether there is a systemic problem, whether the different agencies are working in silos. It is happening because traditionally all these ministries, departments, or these implementing agencies at the central as well as at the the state level. In India, state level is very important because many of the I would say mandates, many of the responsibilities also rest on the states or the cities. So so traditionally they have worked in silos. So transport sector only focused on transport actually. The power managers, they only looked at the power sector. Now it comes to electric mobility. Electric mobility kind of very closely binds these two sectors, power utility and mobility. And so they are yet to kind of get accustomed to this new set of problem or new problem statement actually, because they are not really used to it, and they have been trained based on the traditional method actually, right? So there is a need for reskilling as well. There's a need for mindset change, and I think that will take time. So in short, yes, there is a systemic issue in India as well. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I would like to go to Serbia and maybe ask about the experience of Costa Rica, because we know that Costa Rica maybe 98 or maybe a little bit more sometimes of electric sources are from renewables. So was that maybe also a encouraging point to introduce electric mobility in Costa Rica, and was this a factor that played played for the development of electric mobility in Costa Rica?
Hello, I'm based in Costa Rica, so good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thanks for this invitation. First, I would like to add for Maruk's last answer that I think that this process must be led by the people too. Of course, with help public policy from governments, with investment from the private sector, but the decision of what kind of mobility and energy we want is the decision of the people. So I think that is really important. In Asomove, in Costa Rica, we are drivers, we are people, so we are working with the government, with the private sector, and we understand the important role that people can do. So answering your question, in the case of Latin America, we have one of the cleanest electricity grids in the world, thanks to our abundant hydroelectric power and growing wind and solar generation too. Nearly 60% of electricity generation comes from renewable here in the region. In Costa Rica, in 2021, we generated 99.91% of our electricity from renewable, and while in 2022 it was 98.58%. So this means that we are a region that produces much of our energy in our countries, at least the electric mix. And where do we have a dependency on the international markets is in the use of fuels, mainly in the transport sector. And that is where global crises like the one we are experiencing since 2022 hit us. And that is where global crisis impacted us. Fuel prices go up, our country that made the cost of living go up to the cost of products, raw materials, and cost of transportation was not an exception. In the sector, increase in fuel prices to increase in public transport costs, for example, and an increase in product and delivery services from heavy cargo to light cargo, package delivery. So the war and the post-COVID recovery complicated the promotion of incentives for the production of renewable and for the promotion of electric transport, since the countries face complicated tax situations too. However, important advances has been made during 2022. Several countries in the region advanced with public policy to promote the use of zero emissions transportations, since in our region we can power vehicles with the renewable electricity, as I was saying. And as the Global Status Report points out, around 80 new renewable energy policies were announced in 2022, and 8, meaning 10%, were announced here in Latin America and the Caribbean. And in Central America, for example, Guatemala, Panama, Nicaragua approved laws to promote electric vehicles. In Costa Rica, we already have a law since 2018. In South America, Argentina presented its draft law. Paraguay and Ecuador already have laws too. Just for give some examples, so these are laws that encourage and reward the person who decides to use an electric vehicle. And about public transport, during 2022, countries such as Chile, Colombia, Mexico, they increased their fleets of 100% electric buses. The public and the private sectors made significant investments, because in the region, we understand the need to take urgent actions to reduce the emissions from the transport sector and take advantage of the economic opportunities. So in Latin America, we do not have economies that allow subsidies. We face more complex economic situations compared to European economies, for example. But however, while we do not subsidize transportation, countries do subsidize oil. So in addition, let us remember that oil is also produced in Latin America and the Caribbean. In 2020, I have that data here, the region generated 7.2 million barrels of crude oil per day. And so we wonder, why not all countries subsidize the production of renewable or exempt zero emissions vehicles from taxes? Well, precisely because some economies not only depend on fuels from the international market, but are also oil-producing countries. And for these reasons, public policy to encourage renewable energy must include the monetization of environmental benefits in terms of health, in terms of environment. It must include the economic component and the multiple benefits for the economies of our countries. That is a really challenge we have to demonstrate that the renewable energy production and zero emissions transport also have economic benefits, and that you generate business, jobs, and investment.
Thank you. So Philip, I think it's a nice segue to you. So we see a little bit, maybe some countries are benefiting from renewables to hedge themselves from price volatility of traditional energy. Are public transport operators also realizing that by the switch towards renewables, they can hedge themselves from this volatility and have some predictability in the future? And did this crisis instigate this awareness?
Okay, thanks very much for giving me the floor. And if I can just go back to the very beginning with the poll, because I think it leads me to the answer. I'm actually not sure whether it's a technology gap here, because I think that there are a lot of solutions out there. But I do agree with this point about public policy, economics, and having a favourable tax environment. That's critical. For the public transport sector, I mean, the inflation, etc., has had immediate impact on costs. I think it's important to remember that public transport tends to be the largest single procurer of energy in a city, but also in many other cases nationally. So the cost implications of really, we've seen it globally. I mean, in Dakar, Senegal, costs increased by 30%. But I would say one of the most significant regions that actually impacted was Europe. And I'll give you a couple of examples. In Vienna, the public transport operator, their cost increased by 110 million euros, yet the support from the national government was only 2 million. In Greece, electricity up by 50%, gas up by 65%. In France, rail costs tripled, and Lisbon went up 150%. Clearly, that has a significant impact on costs and your ability to provide services. But I think it's important to remember this has all come at a time where other factors are also playing a significant role in the sector. So we're seeing increase in staff costs, but also in many other regions seeing staff shortages. So again, that's harder to maintain services. So in Australia, some of the operators are indicating that 25% of their posts are open. COVID has changed the way that we travel in our cities during the week. It's around 80% people are working from home. Again, you've got less fare revenue coming into the sector, and recovery packages from national governments, they actually haven't trickled down to the local level. So I think, and when you look at it, you've got increased costs and lower income, and this need to decarbonize the sector, which again also comes at a cost. That is a terrible equation when you're talking about maintaining services and providing low carbon transport solution to the masses to provide access to those who need it most. So I think it's really changed the way that the sector is looking at the renewables debate going forward. I think it really had sort of four significant factors. A real focus on driving efficiency measures within the sector. So as a means to reduce energy costs. In many cases, putting off fare rises. Some countries got sort of national support for that. So in Singapore and Auckland, they did. But in many other regions, it was mentioned Latin America, that they didn't have that support, but it was also, for instance, in Finland and New York as well. So I think that was a really real understanding of the importance of providing sustainable transport solutions. You mentioned the push for locking in fuel prices going ahead. Again, that was significantly looked into, but the availability to do that due to the crisis has been severely diminished. Which brings us actually on to what is the role that renewables plays. And I think that there's been such a significant increase in interest in the importance of this because it's cheaper. I think Delhi Metro is a great example of their investment in on-site renewables reduced their cost by sort of 5% per kilowatt hour. So I think it's really looking at that on-site renewables thing, sharing best practice as an international community, and actually looking at renewables not from an environmental point of view. I think looking at it from a resilience point of view. So I think that everything really has changed quite significantly, and also how the sector is looking.
Philip, we lost the last 5 seconds, but okay, maybe it was just me. But okay, I don't know if you would like to repeat just the last sentence.
Yeah, sure. Technology. So maybe it is a problem about technology and not policy and investment. But no, I was just saying it really has changed the way that the sector is viewing renewables and actually what role it will play in decarbonising the sector, but also providing low emissions mobility going ahead. So I think it's been a real sort of eye opener and for me a bit of a game changer.
That's very encouraging to hear, and also like we're also aware of the difficulties and that the public sector is facing, and it's all of these factors together. So if the public sector is not providing the services that it can, so this will move people towards electric vehicle or individual vehicles, and it won't help the whole story. So renewables should play a bigger role in public transport, and yeah, hopefully there's more awareness about that. Maybe before opening the floor for Q&A, I would like to also have another poll, maybe about the future of transport, and maybe afterwards we can comment about it. So what do people think the most used energy source in transport in 2050 will be? Will it be electricity? Will it be hydrogen, bioenergy, or still be fossil fuel? So we have a long way to go. Right now, around 95% or 96% of energy used in transport is fossil fuel. And will that change in the next 30 years? Thank you for participating. I think I know what most people are going to say.
It all depends on whether you want realism or optimism or a combination of both, you know?
Exactly.
And I think we've also all learned that things can change a lot in 2 years. So it almost feels like right now, wow, talking about the political reckoning, I think that Philip was bringing, you know, of the poly crisis that you presented. Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, I actually
very difficult, you know, to.
I actually wanted to hear your reaction about what Philip say about the difficulties about public sector operators and how this pressure will be felt on the transport sector altogether, I think.
I mean, I think that it confronts us with two things. It confronts us on the one hand with a sometimes the incredible resilience of what happens at the local level. You know, I mean, Philip was talking about great examples of things that are happening, and I also have a few examples here where we see this multiplier effect of a public transport in cities connected with renewable targets. Philip, you mentioned Delhi, but we know we also have Calgary, Chennai, Vancouver, Santiago, Curitiba. It's pretty amazing, and all this has just happened in 21 and 22. You know, in the thick of these combined crises that we've been talking about. But on the other hand, I think it confronts us as well with this notion of common goods, common public goods, and where is it that we want to put money? You know, where do we want public money to go, and in what do we want taxes that we pay the citizens to go into? Linking here to the point that was made about how important it is to integrate all of us as citizens, isn't it, in these choices? I think that it is super interesting to see. I don't think that ever before in the transport sector we've seen such a openness to the political conversation about the addiction of the transport sector to fossil fuels. Before, it's a political reckoning. It's not translated yet in fossil fuel subsidies being banished. I mean, I think we heard as well that for many countries it's a matter of a just transition because they are also producers, and those are very important matters that we have at hand in this combination of renewables and transport nexus. It's a joint just transition, you know, for both sectors. But I do think that we have that political reckoning that we need to harness. I don't think that we've ever before had transport so central to many of the transformative conversations we are having, whether it is the access to transport in difficult moments and having to protect that, the notion of, is it a public good we want to protect, you know, in terms of perhaps protecting public transport. The conversation about inequality, really, like the rockets in inequality we see across the world, and how that translates as well in segregations in neighborhoods and access to mobility, which at the end is access to the society and to a job. The conversation about air pollution, you know, the conversation about health, like moving and not being so sedentary, the conversation about fossil fuels, the conversation about geopolitics. Transport is bang in the middle of all that in a way that it hasn't been before. And we are coming from previous stages in which we were also having the flight shaming, if you remember, and the amount of youth mobilization around changing habits and the sorts. So I think that we are sitting, as probably every time there is something like this in history, we are sitting on a big pile of opportunities. Whether we're going to harness them, that is probably what we will. I don't even know if we will see it. You know, probably all of us here as speakers, we are perhaps very old to see the vast amount of change that needs to happen. But on the other hand, look 3 years ago, and wow, look how well has happened. So I'm feeling a bit of a granny lately, you know, thinking like, gosh, 45 years old and the world is changing. So I would like to stay positive, and some of the figures you've mentioned, Jad, are showing that increase of renewable electricity in transport, that increase of biofuels in transport. That we are seeing those signals. We are seeing more and more investments in SAF, in sustainable aviation fuels. We are seeing even some big shipping companies saying like we had to put a tax on certain things, a carbon tax on shipping and the sort. So we are seeing movement. Now we need to scale it up. That's what we need to do.
Exactly. I don't know if you saw the results of the poll, Shemasis, and I don't know. I would like to because hear your reaction about maybe electricity being the top fuel that people think will be dominant in 2050. I don't know. What are your reaction about this? And yeah, maybe we can.
So yeah, my vote was also on electricity because I believe the ongoing trend of electrifying different end uses, including mobility, will not just continue, it will, I think, accelerate further. So by 2050, definitely, I think electricity will be the primary fuel. But then there was this option of fossil fuel. Now the electricity can be generated from fossil fuel, actually. So I treated fossil fuel as petroleum products. I guess you try to mean petroleum products as fossil fuel. So I think petroleum products will remain in the market because there will be certain geographies, certain markets where the reliance on fossil fuel will remain to some extent. But if we consider the major markets, major economies, I think definitely the transition to electric-based mobility will be definitely very pronounced. I mean, how actually globally we can move and how actually we can integrate renewable energy. So the point is, electricity is not really the solution. It's definitely one of the the levers or drivers, but it's not the solution as far as climate change mitigation is concerned. So it's actually the RE integration. And I think there a lot of work needs to be done. Because it's not really a kind of, you cannot take a one-size-fits-all approach, because mobility pattern or different modes of transport are, they have their own uniqueness. Actually, they have their own unique attributes actually. For example, I mean, I was studying how RE integration can be done in electric mobility. In case of electric vehicles, we find that it could be a more plausible option in case of electric buses. So electric buses could be a better candidate for RE integration, because you can actually predict the commute pattern. The electricity requirement at a particular depot is more. You can actually kind of procure renewable energy to cater to the charging demand of an electric bus fleet. But when you are talking about these scattered public charging stations, where you cannot really predict the EV charging demand, when EVs will come to your facility for charging, there I think the RE integration becomes a challenge. And also just on-site RE generation may not be sufficient actually, because one is land availability and the power demand, vis-a-vis the power demand. So RE generation on-site may not be sufficient to cater to the full demand at a charging station. So you may have to depend on off-site kind of procurement. And I think regulations will be pretty important there. What we see that like open access regulation. So in India, open access is a major regulatory lever actually, but it varies from state to state, the regulations. So what we see that in one state where regulations are more favorable in case of open access, so RE procurement becomes very economical actually, okay, compared to the utility supplied electricity. But in another state, it's the different picture actually, because the regulations kind of artificially make RE procurement not that economical. So there is this play, and I think regulations, electricity regulations would be pretty important, and regulators should kind of recognize that they're not just dealing with now stationary energy consumers actually. There are now dealing with mobile energy end users, and so they have to change their tactics. They have to change their the outlook. So I think that would be a major shift required for the RE integration as far as mobility is concerned.
Yeah, thank you very much for these insights and food for thought for regulators and policymakers on how to look at this shifting landscape concerning electrification of mobility in general. Maybe I would like to ask Sylvia, did you also answer electricity, and maybe do you see a role of biofuels? Will biofuels play any role in the future, especially maybe in Latin America and other countries also?
Yes, exactly. I answered electric vehicles because we actually work on that. And I think that we should take advantage of that situation to take actions in that direction of promoting the use of 100% electric transport, zero emissions transport, and of course, powered by renewable energy. The use of electric vehicles is growing in the region. For example, in Costa Rica, in last December 2022, 10.6% of new registered vehicles were 100% electric. That is more than 1 in 10. And so far in 2023, we have had 186% growth from electric vehicles compared to the first month of last year. This shows that the region is ready. People's ready to move in zero emissions vehicles. We have public policy. We need to work more on that. We are working on charger infrastructure, continuing growing the charger points, and we increasingly have more car Cars, not only cars. When I talk about electric vehicles, I'm talking about cars, bikes, trucks, buses, and we have more of trucks, of bikes, of cars models on our markets. And the countries must take concrete actions to encourage public transport systems. That is important for us. That's why I'm saying I'm not talking only about electric cars. I'm talking about electric vehicles, and public transport system is really important for us. We need a modern and efficient, and of course, a powered by renewable energy public transport in our region. And that is what we aim at ASOMOVE, the EV Association here in Costa Rica, and in Alamos, the Latin American Association, in generating those public policies and actions necessary to promote zero emissions transport, not only private transport, but also public transport. That there is the key. And in our region, we have important targets for net zero emissions. In the case of Costa Rica, we have our national decarbonization plan that proposes decarbonizing our economy by 2050, and that including the transportation sector, of course. Chile banned the entry of ICE vehicles by 2035. And other countries should follow this path and implement concrete goals. In 2019, the Climate Action Summit of the United Nations, the Energy Pact for Latin America and the Caribbean was initiated to achieve 70% participation of renewable energy in the electricity mix by 2030. I don't know if we are going to get on that 70%. But for example, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, and Mexico are the forefront in the operation of large-scale wind and solar farms here in Latin America. And that's a good sign. And we have laws promoting electric mobility in several countries. And what Latin America always needs is financing, actually, creating business models where the public and the private sectors participate with alliances and thinking about improving the quality of the service for the users, for the people. And however, the question is always who makes the investment. And that is why we have not moved faster in terms of electric buses or electric public transport or renewable energy. And about EV adoption in Latin America, we are working on several axes, but basically public policy, charging, and market supply. And about the action needed, we need emission standards for used ICE vehicles. We don't have that. Used ICE vehicles taxes, for example, tax reductions for EV imports. In Costa Rica, we have it, but there is other countries in Latam that don't. But we haven't been able to place taxes on polluting vehicles. So we need support to carry out a tax reform. I think that is important, but I think that the region has great challenges, but at the same time, great opportunities, and we can create an attractive regional market for renewable energy and for zero emissions mobility.
Thank you very much. Maybe Philip, would you like to comment on the poll and maybe also comment on what Sylvia mentioned about the public-private partnerships, and if that can help also the procurement of renewables?
Yeah, I'll firstly touch on the poll.
Yeah.
I think 2050 is way too late to be having this conversation, because I mean, if you look at the figures that you mentioned, 0.4% of renewable electricity in transport from renewables. I'm sorry, but that's just rubbish. It really is bad. And if we carry on at this pace, we're going to get absolutely nowhere. And we have to remember what the IPCC is telling us. We need a 43% drop in emissions by 2030 in the transport sector. It's just going up. So this, and 2030 is 18 months away. We can't carry on like this. I'm sorry. So and the other thing is that if we keep looking at transport as in with tailpipe regulations or location-based accounting regulations in transport, you're never going to move quicker at all in renewables in transport. So we really need to focus on that better integration between transport and energy, because there's a disconnect. We know it is. You know, energy is driven at the national level predominantly. If you look at transport in cities, it's a local issue. You have to bridge that gap. And we have to turn renewable energy and transport, not from a scarce resource to an abundant resource. And I think this is where this important sort of transition piece is what we've spoken about. And we really, you know, the electrification is clearly there. We really see that within the public transport sector, and many more cities making those commitments to increase electrification, but doing that also with renewables as well. And I think we have to look at actually how can you use a public transport network and the infrastructure that is there to really scale up within cities, because, you know, that's where we're going to make the biggest wins out of all of this. I mean, if, as I mentioned, public transport is the largest single procure across a city. It reaches across a city where the spread and reach means that we can integrate it not only just with public transport sector, but also these new mobility providers that complement the network. So e-scooters, e-cars, so on and so forth. And so I think what that does is actually open new business models there. So this public-private partnership that you were talking about. And we're seeing this sort of work with using regenerative brakings in metro networks to provide charging infrastructure for other types of modes. But and this is where I think battery storage becomes actually quite an interesting sort of game changer in the fact that it can actually have a small multiplier effect. And I think it's also important to recognise that the public transport infrastructure is vast within a city. So in New York, they have enough sort of rooftop space to provide solar power for 18,000 houses. And what we're beginning to see is operators and authorities looking at how they can do battery storage to increase the resilience of their network, but also integrate that within different areas. So in Gothenburg, they're doing a pilot on using secondhand bus batteries to store solar power in homes, in flats to charge homes. Again, that opens new business opportunity, and that helps to see that integration within different sectors, from transport, buildings, so on and so forth. And we see it in London when you're looking at heat from the underground network to provide homes with heating and hot water for, I think it's 1,350 homes in London. So I think we need to look at how we can use the infrastructure and have this better integration, because if we do this very piecemeal, siloed approach, we're not going to see any change. And at the end of the day, 2050 is way too late. So we have to really speed this up.
Thanks very much, Philip. I don't know if Marusha, you want to comment on this integrated approach that we started with, and also I would like to hear your comments about, I don't know if you heard this week, but the banning of 2- and 3-wheelers in Paris, and what are your thoughts about this also?
I could see that coming. I was getting really carried away and excited by the question I see in the chat. I'm so happy that somebody asked that. Second-hand vehicle dumping into other geographies. I really hope we get there, you know, but let me try. I mean, it's interesting. I think that, I mean, we also know that democracy, as Churchill used to say, is just the least bad of all the systems we have, like as humanity, isn't it? It's interesting to note when one polls citizens as well, how does one consider that there's been sufficient quorum depending on how many people showed up to the polls. And there is a bit of a conversation going on, I know, in Paris and in different media. I could suggest if anybody's interested, read about the news in Politico, you know, and you will see that they are making a bit of emphasis on the fact that only 8% of the eligible people to vote actually turn up to the polling, which is, I think it's food for thought as well, in how do we integrate participatory planning and participatory decision making in the new mobility that we want to pursue in cities. But I think that it is showing us the importance of regulation as well, and how if we don't have the policies and the regulations in place that orient private sector solutions to public policy goals, we're going to really struggle. And I think it also speaks about something very important, which takes us back to the integration between transport and land management, which is that we really need a conversation about what is the democratic use of public space, in the sense that right now we have cities that are just planned for cars and anything that is motorized, no? And some of them are starting to be planned for buses, luckily, no? But there is that conversation of how do we want to share that stretch of road, and how many people are we moving, and how do we actually make it compatible for everybody, from the elderly person to the kid to play to the safety that is needed in that sense. I think it's a pity, if I may just dive, I think it's a pity that we got into that point in Paris. I visit Paris very regularly on a weekly basis for personal reasons, and I have seen, and I can understand why we have got into that situation. It's been a jungle, absolutely, but it's not only Paris. But I do think that it raises the alert of how do we make a multimodal system of mobility in cities, because there is a lot of good potential for these kind of shared schemes of 2- and 3-wheelers in cities, particularly if they are renewable powered, to become that last mile that allows us to get to a public transport station, or to get from the public transport station home, and that actually pulls us out of our cars, or that prevents us, or that supports the amount of people who are currently lacking access to proper and sound public transport in the world, which is actually 60% of population in the world lacking that access. So I do think that it's an eye-opener to all of us. What is the conversation we need to have? What is the governance systems that we need in place, not just when the private sector arrives with their solutions, but how do we integrate that in a combined multimodal and intermodal system of mobility for a city? So it's a bit of a mixed feeling that I have, as somebody who, as I say, spends a lot of time in Paris, I can understand it personally. I've been myself got very angry, at some of the behaviors I've seen, but I think it's a pity we've gotten there. Yeah.
Thank you for commenting on very recent news. So also I want to thank the audience for putting in their questions in the chat. I think we have a very interesting question, as Marusha pointed out. So I think in summary is, what do we do with the old combustion cars? And if they are exported to, so for example, Wolfgang is telling us that Germany has a 15 million EV target in 2030, and the downside will be millions of 5 to 20-year-old combustion engine cars exported to countries outside Europe. So are there any policies that we are seeing to mitigate this, and are countries doing any active measures to prevent this? I don't know if Shimasis, you want to comment on this. I saw you nodding. That's why I'm I'm pointing the question towards you.
So I was nodding because I do recognize that is going to be a major problem actually, and that will kind of burst in front of our face actually. So I think to avoid this kind of situation, scrappage policy is going to be important. So the government should kind of stipulate that, scrappage means it is going out of the market and you have to show the scrappage certificate. So recently in India, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, they actually brought the rules on vehicle scrappage. And that actually kind of stipulates that you have to show the scrappage certificate from recognized organizations or institutions that, okay, this vehicle has reached the end of its useful life. Along with that, I think circular economy or resource efficiency interventions would be important, because you are scrapping some materials. Ultimately, they have materials, they have values, and waste is a wealth, which we are taught from our early classes actually, right? So how we can actually tap this wealth? So circular economy is going to be important. So ultimately they will contain steel, they will contain some, and so recycling industry needs to really mature. The good thing is in India, actually, recycling is pretty common. So what I have learned that as much as 90% of the materials used in a vehicle is recycled in the country. But then the question is, how are they recycled? Because the recycling industry in India is pretty informal, actually. So, there is, standard safety practices are not really followed always. Okay. So we need also policies on recycling, how we can formalize this sector. Then also we can actually scale up the recycling capacity of a country. So one, scrappage policy. Two, you require this circular economy principles, and you have to actually mature the recycling industry. Then only we can avert this kind of serious situation, and we don't have to really wait for 2030. I think in few years time we will face this, and it's not just IC vehicles. Even we will land up with this electronic waste, battery waste, actually, because they will also reach, many of the vehicles will reach their end of mobility life. So how can we extend their useful life? How can we kind
repurpose them also? Yes,
exactly. So battery recycling is again going to be pretty important, and it will be very tricky, more tricky than managing IC vehicles.
All right, I see also Marusha nodding. Would you like to add?
Thanks a lot. What a great answer. I just wanted to provide some figures, because that question is really critical. And as it's just been said, it's not just about the ICE, but it's also about the EV, and how we're going to be recycling all that. But people were wondering if there's any policies there or anything to consult. I would recommend reading the report from the United Nations Environment Programme about it, last year's report. The figures are horrendous. It's 19 million cars exported to low and middle income countries, particularly from the US, the EU, Japan, and the Republic of South Korea. Cars which in many instances are not anymore complying with these standards of road safety and roadworthiness and pollution in the countries from where they are exported. So it's about there's important issues here about exporting inequality and misery and all that, And we are seeing quite interesting action coming directly from the low and middle income countries, who are getting together or individually starting to put in place harmonized minimum quality standards, which is what this report from the United Nations Environment Programme is talking about. So I would suggest that people had a look at what is happening in the Economic Community of West African States. 15 countries there are working on these harmonized standards, are putting them in place, or have a look at Peru, Cambodia, and Ethiopia. It's extremely interesting what is occurring. We need much more of that. We need to really also empower low and middle income countries in knowing that they can say no. I always make this parallelism with what happened with the exportation of waste from Europe, that we were just dumping it somewhere. And one day those countries said like, no, we're not taking your waste anymore. And reckoning in the European Union, a lot of legislation coming from European Union institutions and at national level that really changed the way in which we're sort of dealing with our waste problem in the European Union. So we need to support countries in that. And of course, the points that have been made about scrapping and policies for the recycling are essential. I would also say that we need to invest in the endogenous capacities in these countries, in low and middle income countries, for them to be able to repurpose. And indeed, for instance, you can consult the electric mobility strategy of Chile, which went, I think, in as far as trying to look into repurposing and creating a market for it. But we also need to make sure that there's more options in low and middle income countries to move around than just to win a private car, because otherwise we're just stuck in the same old problems. And the rocketing private motorization rates that we are seeing in some of these countries is an issue that we need to look into, and we need to support those countries to have other options that are about public and shared mobility in their cities. So again, a holistic approach, but I'm so happy we could address this question. It's really a systemic question about a lot of policy coherence, including trade policies.
Exactly. Thank you. I agree. Thank you very much for the lovely panel today. It was very rich discussion. We only have 5 or 6 minutes left. I'd like to ask you to maybe make a closing statement or closing remark with 1 minute or 1.5 minutes if possible. And like, anyone would like to volunteer about starting?
I'm giving my minute to others because I spoke a lot.
Okay.
Okay, let me
Thank you,
go first,
Marusha.
and I will be brief. So, when we are talking about electric mobility, use of electricity for mobility purposes, I think we are just focusing on the vehicles. But there is another mode of transport, railways, which also are run largely on, can be run on electricity. And it's also a very cleaner mode of transport, maybe more than vehicles, because they do not cause congestion on the road. And they can be very economical. They can cater to a huge section of the population. So in India, Indian Railways is actually one of the world's largest railway network. And if you see the electricity usage in transport in the country, it is only 2%. Out of 2%, almost entirely it is because of the traction and railways. Now, the good thing is Indian Railways has taken a target to achieve net zero by 2030. And that is possible by transitioning from diesel traction to electric traction, one, and then using renewable energy. So there is a requirement of, I think, 30 gigawatt of RE capacity to cater to the demand. So my point is, we should actually look at the entire gamut of options as far as electrification of transport is concerned. It's not just the vehicles, it's also this, railway kind of system or carriage kind of system. Yeah, thank you.
Sylvia or Philip, as you wish.
Okay. Okay, so just two short comments. I wanted to mention something that is really important, because in ATAM, we are a used vehicles market. In ATAM, a lot of used vehicles are consumed, and we need to put restrictions on that entry of used ICE vehicles. Chile already has it, but for example, in Costa Rica, that we promote 100% electric vehicles. We promote also used electric vehicles. And talking about batteries, we are already discussing whether or not it is a good idea to promote used electric vehicles, especially in a technology that is advancing so quickly. And second, just for finishing, in Costa Rica, I want to put on this an important fact that we have, that is that we have the goal of becoming independent from fossil fuels, as established in our decarbonization plan, and that we also allow that will also allow us to achieve energy independence, and that is part of the evolution of the role of renewables energies in the transport sector and in our economies, because it is clean energy, but it is also energy made in our countries. So that will allow us to avoid the effects of international markets. So I'm finished with that idea that is not only because of the environment, of course, but also because if we promote renewable energy, we're going to have this independence, this energy independence that Latin America really needs.
Thank you. Philip.
Yeah, I'll give you my final thoughts, and they originate from the Spirent conference. So the International Renewable Energy Conference in Spain, where I was with Marisha in a transport session. And it was really insightful in the fact that the transport and energy sectors really don't understand each other. And we really need to get better at that. And this is why I think the Global Status Report is really, really important. And I congratulate you for it, because we really need to build those bridges between the supply and the demand side. And I think when you look at the opportunities next year in at the next Renewable Energy Conference, I think that's a real opportunity to start that conversation with transport ministers, energy ministers, but also those people that do transport on the ground. And I think if we start to harness that discussion, we won't see this massive difference where you see buildings industry transport, they all use 30%, but there's just a massive gap in transport. We really have to address that, and we really need to start that conference. So firstly, I congratulate you on the work that you've done. And secondly, I think it's a massive opportunity at next year's International Renewable Energy Conference to take it forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the encouraging word, and for your participation, and for the participation and listening of all our listeners today. I think the conversation we had today was very rich. We touched upon a lot of issues, and the importance of integration, the importance of bridging silos, the importance of looking holistically at the system, and how to bridge demand and supply, and maybe trying to solve the mystery of why renewables is so low in the transport sector. I would like to remind everyone that tomorrow we have our final event on agriculture at 9 a.m. Paris time. We try to mix the timing a little bit to have a global coverage in these events, and I invite you also to watch Ren21 Spaces to look at our upcoming publications, and I'll just end with this poll very quickly about the regional consumption in renewables. Which region has the highest consumption? If you and then maybe a last quiz of which region, or sorry, what is the share of renewables in transport? And yeah, thank you everybody for joining, and hopefully see you tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, my panelists, my dear panelists. Thank you. Well, on this first poll, so most people think it's Europe. Actually, it's wrong. It's North America. Maybe it's the time of the event is the issue. And last poll about the share of transport. It's not quizzing if you're listening, just the perception.
Should I mention the correct answer? Because I remember.
What did we get? Did we get a cookie? Right?
What
or
is
another
it?
cup of tea? Or you
I'm sure
never,
the answer to this
never
one was
invite us
mentioned.
again if we don't get it
No.
right now.
I wanted to make this joke, but I thought no. Thank you, Marusha, for making it for me.
Thanks very much, team, for the very good conversation, and to Ren21 team. You have a marathon of events. So, Philip, thank you for saying what I would have said, because I really would have wanted to make that personal reflection about Spirec. You know, how eye-opening it was, isn't it, to see and how important are those for us, and certainly why we need these kind of demand-oriented conversations.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Hopefully we'll see you all next year also in OS IREC.
well, I mean, hopefully we will do more than just that, isn't it? In between, the idea here, I think, is that structured dialogue, that facilitation of the two communities talking a bit, finding currency to talk to each other. I think that's what we have at hand. So.
And just for Sylvia, and I'm not sure Shamati, so we did collaborate with WRI for this Spirec, but in any case, so this is the International Renewable Energy Conference. that REN21 organizes together with the national government. Normally every 2 years, but in this case, so this year we had it in Spain, and in 2024 it would be in Australia. So that's why it's OSIREC. And now that you're part of the community, we hope to see you there as well and keep engaging with.
Definitely it's closer for you than for us, you know. In Europe.
And by the way, most people answered correctly. It's 4.1%.
Good. Anyway, so thanks very much, and
thank you.
All the best for tomorrow. Last one you said, isn't it? So come on.
Yeah, last push.
Exactly, last push. Thanks very much, colleagues. Lovely to share panel. And thanks
Nice
to
to meet you.
IT there, you know, thanks a lot.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
See you
Thank you,
soon.
everyone.
Have a
Yes,
good
bye-bye.
Very much.
afternoon, night. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.